So you mentioned Kant, and you mentioned Ayn Rand's aversion to Kant, and you mentioned how Kant is problematic in a way, and how Jordan Peterson, you claim, is a Kantian in terms of his epistemology. So let me ask you, what do objectivists find problematic about Kant? Kant believes that it's the formulating categories of our mind that shape the experiences, that shape the world the way that we see it. But Kant does believe in the objective world. He does believe that there are objects out there, that there are things in themselves, that we can't experience them directly, but they're there, and we have this imperfect filter. That's a good question.
I mean, the problem is he doesn't know that. He can state that. He can say whatever he wants, and that's why his followers ultimately doubt the existence of things out there. They doubt the existence of reality out there.
That's a great point.
He can't prove it, right? Look, so let me preface this, right? I am not a philosopher, so I'm not an expert on this. You'll have to have Greg Salamiri, Jon Kagate, or
anytime.
Harry Bitz, or somebody who is a real philosopher and who understands Kant deeply. So I'll give you my understanding of Kant, which is not complete and not full. But that's an example of what I mean. How does he know reality exists? He just states it. Because he says that what we're observing is not reality. He says, indeed, that the categories or the way our brain is structured, it distorts it creates a mirage for us in terms of what we're seeing. We're not seeing actual reality. We're seeing what our senses and our mind filters that is representative of something maybe in reality. And that, of course, opens up the door to reality doesn't exist, which is what the moderns ultimately come to. I think that's both, absurd and maybe because he comes before Darwin, you could somehow accept that. But if our mind truly didn't give us what is really out there in reality, the human species would not be around today, right? All the evidence suggests that when I pick up a pen and write, it's actually a pen and it actually writes. It's not me imagining, it's not filtering, the pen is not something else. All of my senses are consistent in terms of this. And when the saber-toothed tiger is chasing me, it's a saber-toothed tiger, not a little cat. And if it was a little cat, then I'd be wasting a lot of energy. And if when I saw a cat and it was actually a saber-toothed tiger, I'd be dead because the saber-toothed tiger would have eaten me. So I think that just our experience of reality suggests that reality is there and that we're experiencing it as it is. Now, it doesn't mean that we experience it in every aspect of it, right? So a bat experiences reality differently than we do. But a bat still experiences the same reality, just from a different perspective. It senses it using sound waves. So its experience of it is different, but it's the same reality. That is, if it looks at a cave, I can measure the cave, and the bat, in a sense, will measure the cave. And we will be able to, if the cat could describe it, we will be able to describe exactly the same cave.
Kant would agree with that.
I don't think Kant would agree with that.
Really?
Yes,
so Kant still believes that if I have this cup here, he believes that I'm not experiencing the thing in itself, but that I am having sensations that deliver sense data to my mental apparatus, and that I can make true claims about this mug.
I'm not sure that. I don't think that's true.
Okay.
So I don't think true in this sense means the same thing. I don't think true means that what I'm describing is I'm describing something that really is in reality. It's true in the sense that me and you, because we have the same categorical imperatives or the same structure of the brain, according to Kant. And again, why is that? How do we know we all have the same? Maybe women have it differently than men. Maybe blacks and whites have it differently, and maybe Asians have it differently. So you start breaking it up into identity politics, which is completely Kantian, and we all have different structures of the brain, and we all describe. So when supposedly, right, I'm not arguing this, supposedly when a woman describes the cup, it's a very different cup than when I describe a cup, but we, because we're men, are describing the same cup.
I see your point.
According to Kant, all of us as human beings are describing the same cup. I am claiming that what we're describing is a real cup, and it has that what we're describing about the cup really does exist in reality, and therefore if a bat could talk, a bat that has a completely different structure of the brain, it would describe the same cup as well, because otherwise I would bump into, I couldn't use the cup. I couldn't actually get it, into my mouth and to actually get the liquid. And the bat would keep bumping into it because it could. So if you think about it from a post-evolution perspective, we have evolved to be able to see reality as it is. Otherwise, we would die. And reality as it is the same for us as it is for the bat. We just observe it differently, and we observe different aspects of it because of how our senses work. We have different senses. But the reality has unchanged. And I think that's important because, again, Kant now, once you have this structured brain and categorical, you can now break it up in different ways. This is how the Nazis can say, well, there's an Aryan way of looking at the world, and we Aryans have a particular brain, and look, our skulls are different than Jewish skulls, and therefore the brains are different, and therefore Jews see the world differently. Jews don't see the world that we Aryans, and therefore they're a different species, and we can wipe them out because they're evil or whatever. Right? I think it's that Kant sets that in motion by saying that our brain dictates the reality that's out there, not just and that it's particular categorical, categories that make that possible. And then, of course, so that's his epistemology and metaphysics, which I think are wrong. Ultimately, very primacy of consciousness. So our consciousness is in some way creating, filtering, determining what reality is. And look, that comes from a rationalist tradition going back to Descartes. I mean, I think, therefore I am. Not Ayn Rand's flipped that around, right? Ayn Rand's formulation is much more interesting. She says, I am, therefore I think, which is much more what human beings are. I am, what am I? I am a human being, therefore what is characteristic of a human being is thinking. But thinking then takes on a different category. It's about awareness of reality. It's not about playing games in your mind. So I think Kant detaches reality from the mind, even though he doesn't go all the way. His followers take the consequences of what he has established all the way, and it's worse with Hegel, and it's worse then with every iteration forward, all the way to the postmodernists that we have today. And I think they are children of Kant in ways that everybody, in a sense, today in modern philosophy, in one way or another, is a child of Kant. And then morally, of course, this is where he's particularly offensive. Yeah,
so where morally does Ayn Rand stand? So Kant has his categorical imperative, his deontology, and then there's utilitarianism, consequentialism, that has dominated the world. Our democratic policies are progressive taxation is based on utilitarianism. And then there's virtue ethics. Where does Ayn Rand stand in that sort of tripartite story of ethics?
Well, if you had to do a tripart, then she would be on the virtue ethics part, but that is too superficial to put her just in virtue ethics, because the question for virtue ethics is why? Why these virtues? What's the standard by which we determine the virtues? Where do the virtues come from? And as far as I understand, again, the virtue ethicists don't know exactly how to answer any of those questions. There's not a clear answer. So what Rand asks, she asks a question that I don't think any philosophers have asked in a very long time, probably since the Greeks. What do we need ethics for? What's this field for? And it's to give us a guide for what values to pursue. So what are values? And what makes values possible? What is the context in which human beings need values? And so values are things one acts to gain or keep. Well, why would one act to gain or keep anything? What is it? And she says, well, there's really only one fundamental choice that all living things face, that all living beings face, and that is the choice between life and death, right? And therefore, she says, if you choose life, there's no dictating that you should choose life, but if you choose life, then the question becomes, what value should I pursue to achieve life, right? But you first have to identify this fundamental alternative that we all face as human beings. And then, who should be the beneficiary of these values? Well, I chose life, my life, right? That's where the focal point of values and virtues, virtue ethics should be, is how do I live life? How do I survive? How do I thrive? How do I live as a human, fully as a human being? What are the values and virtues that are going to achieve life, right? If I want death, that's easy, right? But life is hard. Figuring out how to live is complicated. I mean, we still, as scientists, look at other animals and say, how do they live? What do they have to do in order to survive, in order to be successful as a cheetah or as a tree? You know, what are their mechanisms? And that's what science. Well, what she says is ethics is that scientific question applied to human beings. What do human beings need to do in order to achieve life? Now, what makes human beings unique, Ayn Rand says, and again, some philosophers would question this, right, is that we have free will, that we get to choose our values, and that the fundamental mechanism by which human beings survive is by the use of their reason, which for Ayn Rand is the identification of reality, that is the understanding of what is reality. So again, anti-Kantian in a sense, that for us it's the most important thing we can do is figure out what is out there, what is reality, and then integrate those facts and work to help us, to guide us in changing reality, to adapt it to our own means, to our own needs. So all the virtues and values are really derived from this idea of reason, the idea of the fact that reason is our basic means of survival. Man's means of survival is to think. Man's means of survival is to be aware of reality and to think and to integrate it into cognition. So her ethics flows from that. So the virtues, i.e. virtue ethics, come from what are the actions, virtues are actions. What are the actions? What are the principled actions that human beings must take in order to thrive, in order to flourish as human beings? And so it's an egoistic approach, which some virtue ethicists have. They take that from Aristotle. It's an egoistic approach in terms of I'm the beneficiary of my actions. But it's an approach rooted in reality. This is the is-ought that she bridges. The is the nature of man, the nature of the world out there. The ought is, what do I do given my nature? Given the nature of reality, what do I need to do in order to survive, to thrive, to flourish as an individual human being?
So the is informs the ought.
Yes. Yes. So, and the big way in which it informs the ought is reason is the man's basic means of survival. Given the world, given how we've evolved, given what we are as human beings, it is our reason that is distinctive. It is our reason that makes it possible for us to survive in the world.
So how do you respond to thinkers like Jonathan Haidt, who claim that, hey, reason's excellent, it's an excellent tool, but we're not that good at using it. We engage in motivated reasoning. We are tribal creatures. We evolved to be tribal creatures. We engage in confirmation bias, and we're basically circling around sacred totems and then making judgments intuitively and then applying post hoc reasoning on top of that and engaging in confirmation bias to basically justify the things that we already intuitively believe to be true prior to reason. How do you respond to that? I think
it's a combination of things. One, I think it's descriptive, not normative. So yeah, a lot of people behave this way.
That's true.
Does that mean that's how we should behave? Does that mean that is the only way for us to behave? Do we have an option? Second, so one, I think it's descriptive. It's not normative, so it's not ethics in that sense. Ethics is normative. Ethics should tell you this is how you should behave. Second is, I think there's a lot that we don't know that is disguised as evolutionary psychology, which Haidt and Jordan Peterson and Steven Pinker and all these guys advocate for. What are we born with? What aren't we born with? What is free will? I mean, most of these guys reject free will, right? Now, I mean, Jordan Peterson doesn't, but he has a weird...
Sam Harris does, though.
Sam Harris does, and Pinker does, right? Steven Pinker rejects free will.
Which I don't understand.
Jonathan Haidt, again, tries to have it both ways. So what are we born with? I mean, Aristotle said we were born tabula rasa. What does that mean? So I still think we're born, and Ayn Rand certainly thought we were born tabula rasa in the sense of ideas. We can't be socialists at birth. It makes no sense if you understand how, and this is why Ayn Rand's contributions to philosophy are so massive and so important. Ayn Rand has a theory of concepts. She has a theory of how we come at ideas, how we integrate the observations, the perceptions of our senses into concepts, into first level concepts, chair, table, furniture, and then more and more abstract concepts, all the way up to socialism.
Sounds
right?
Lockean.
There's a sense in which it's Lockean, although again, I don't know enough about Locke's epistemology. He's a bit of a, at some point, he's a bit of a mystic, unfortunately, Locke. But you know, again, this is the Enlightenment. This is the age of reason. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are elements of Locke there. But she has a whole theory about how we do this, which I think is fascinating. And one of the great pleasures when I had kids was to watch them form their first concepts and to say, yeah, that's exactly what Ayn Rand wrote about in terms of how human beings do it. And I wish, like child psychologists, like people like Piaget, that Jordan Peterson loves to cite, looked at Ayn Rand's theory of concept and looked at actually how children learn, and they would be blown away, I think, by how much of a genius she was. So I think it's still tragic that we don't have that. So none of these people understand the theory of concepts. So they think we're born with high-level abstractions, which you can't code. You can't code abstractions into the genome. The abstractions are something that have to be abstracted from perception. If you haven't had perception, how can you have an abstraction?
Right, simple sensations, yeah.
Yeah, so you start with sensations, then perceptions, and then abstractions. And only human beings, as far as we know, can abstract. Animals can perceive, but they can't abstract. So if you have that sequence, if you can, so they're not capable of separating. So for example, if I ask them, how do you separate between emotion, senses, thought, inclinations, you know, what else? Instinct, what they could call as instinct, and a million other different forms of what it is we're born with, or what it is. They can't even differentiate. They don't have definitions for any of these things. And then they go out and say, we're born with X. They don't know what they're talking about. So I believe that evolutionary psychology is like it's at its infancy. People talk about it as if it's a science, but it's still very, very early. So when Jonathan Haidt says we're born, you know, conservatives are born conservatives, and I mean, that's silly. It's yes, people are born with certain inclinations. There's no question about that. Both my sons, from the moment they were born, they were different. So there's something different in them, but it couldn't have been their ideas, right? And it could have been other things, but what are those other things? I don't think the Haidts of the world and others have yet the tools to describe what it really is we're born with and what distinguishes us when we're born with, versus because they don't have the epistemological tools to understand how we develop concepts, how we grow up, how we become adults. So until they develop that, so in other words, I think Jonathan Haidt and all these evolutionary psychologists desperately need Ayn Rand's epistemology. So I encourage them all, if you're listening, to read Ayn Rand's Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, and to read, you know, the companion to Ayn Rand studies and the chapters on epistemology. So there's a lot of work that's being done, and I hope will be done, on her theory of concepts, on her epistemology, that I think will help clarify these guys' work in the future. Let me just add one other thing. Reason is hard, in a sense, right? Not hard in a sense that, oh my God, it's painful. No, it's hard in the sense that it requires effort. It requires work. And this is Ayn Rand's unique view of free will. Ayn Rand's view of free will is not that I choose every time I do this, right? Which is the, you know, Sam have a stupid neurological study that he cites all the time, which has been debunked by lots of different people, but he continues to cite it anyway, right? That every time I do this, I'm actually thinking I should do this, and that's free will. That's silly, right? Free will is fundamentally the choice to focus your mind or not to focus your mind, to stay in touch with reality or not to stay in touch with reality, or in other words, to reason or not to reason, to be or not to be. And she would say to reason or not to reason is to be or not to be, right? It's because the essential activity of being,
right, exactly, yeah,
reasoning, is to be conscious, is to be aware of the world. I think a lot of people, maybe most people, and Haidt would I think would suggest this is true, don't choose to think, don't choose to engage. So what have you got left if you're not thinking, if you're not reasoning? You've got the tribe. You've got your emotion. You're drifting. You're just following what people are saying. You're going along. So yes, the default of reason is all these things Jonathan Haidt describes as the way people behave today. But what are we capable of? Because even Jonathan Haidt, even all of these scientists, they draw nice bell curves. But what about these people out here? What about the people out at the extreme of the bell curve? What about the people who are not tribal? What about the people who are not agreeable? They have these agreeable, the people who don't do everything based on what other people think. Again, think about the fact that we're taught from when we're very little, other people are important, other people are the most important thing for you. Don't spend too much thinking, don't too much time thinking, follow the leader. Who are you, you little twerp? I mean, you're nothing. So yeah, we train kids to be tribal. We train kids to emote. Today at schools, we put them around in a circle and ask them, what do you think about Donald Trump when they're 6? Well, they don't think about Donald Trump, right? You know, they emote. So you're basically elevating emotion above anything else. No, student when they're 6, when they're 8, when they're 10, when they're 12, when they're 14 even, they should spend time in school learning stuff, not emoting. I don't care about your emotions as a teacher, right? I care about what's in here. Your parents might care about your emotions. Your friends might care about your emotions. I don't care about your emotions as a teacher. And until we get to an educational system that looks to teach rather than to coddle, then we're not going to get the kind of people that I would like, which are independent, truly thinkers. And when we do, Jonathan Haidt's studies would look a lot different. Because, I mean, unfortunately, I mean, Adam Smith was the same way. When he talks about ethics, he doesn't talk about it from a normative perspective. He talks about it from a descriptive perspective. This is what people do. Yeah, they're all raised Christians, so they all care about other people more than they should. You know, so then he says, well, there you go, that's ethics. No, that's the ethics of the time, right, dictated by certain ideas that are present at the time. But it doesn't mean that's what is the best in man. That doesn't mean what they're capable of. It's just what they've been taught. And you know, in that sense, too many people, because they don't exert free will, are the products of their environment. And that is sad. So I'd like more people to exert their free will. And Sam Harris, on the one hand, can be an original thinker, can think outside the box, engages his reason. I think Sam Harris is a thinker and is using his free will to think. But then he uses it to deny free will, which is so rationalistic and silly and actually does harm in the world, which is sad. But if more people like Sam Harris in the sense of they were engaged with reality and thinking, then the world would be a better place.